It's a delight to have you join us in this edition of Alleged Good Governance Conversation. Adam Wilson on Marshall. Well, today is all about demanding accountability from the government of the day. Talk about the federal, the state, and of course the local government. But for today, we are zooming in on what is going on in Edo State. After all, tragedy to say begins at home. Some of the people that Nigerians are too docile in the sense that we just let things be the way they are. We were saying that Nigerians are too churches, or let's say religious. They tend to rely more on prayers and of course on God for divine intervention and direction without taking their destinies in their own hands, without asking questions for dividends of democracy to start off with. They're going to see things going wrong. Maybe they're too scared or too timid to go out there to ask questions upon questions. That brings to mind the song that Fela sang. I know one day, Mama day for house, Papa day for house. Is that the reason why Nigerians are beginning to, lose focus or on the activities of government of the day? These and lots more will take a look at today's installment of today's edition of the program. With me here in the studio is the Executive Director of ANEJ, Reverend David Ogolo. Reverend, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now, talking about good governance, it's like Nigerians are the type of persons that will be like, God, take control. Father, take control. What will be, will be. When you relate Nigerians to other clients, before come to Edo State, I mean, the rate at which they respond to governance, how come it differs?
Again, Wilson, thank you very much for, again, joining us in this good governance conversation. So we are happy that we're focusing on Edo State today. Yeah. And also reflecting on what has happened in the last few weeks. At least one of the big news in town is the outcome of the tribunal. Yeah. What is the implication for governance? And then ultimately, how does it relate to quality of life in Edo State? I think this is the real key thing. Yeah. And in the face of this challenge of opposition going to the court, contesting the outcome of the election, what is the impact on governance? You and I know that definitely it has a way of bringing the temple of governance very slow. It brings the wheel of governance slow down. And that really impacts negatively on the quality of life in terms of how the governor focus on key issues that will impact on the people's life. But ultimately, at the end of the day, those are part of how you strengthen institutions. Ultimately, it helps to avoid conflict, crisis, and things that could probably potentially endanger development. But just looking at what has happened in the last few weeks now and the outcome of the tribunal, and in the long run, is opportunity for the state government now to, again, remind themselves of the need to focus on governance. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, people will not remember whether there was court action or whatever, anything. People want to be able to say that after 4 years, what can we remember Governor Kpewulu for? What are the things he has been able to do? And for us, just looking from far distance and trying to see how we can also engage in terms of making sure that key government institutions that will help strengthen governance are put in place. For instance, those state governments signed on to the Open Government Partnership, OGP. How far have they gone before this new government came on board? What are the key elements of those commitments and things that will help strengthen governance in Edo State? And one of those things is issue of participation. How can the people participate in governance, either through parliamentary intervention or through open budgeting processes? Because one of the key things that government do that ultimately will influence the quality of life of the people is amount of resources government invests in key infrastructure. You take road infrastructure, for instance. You take health sector, which ultimately the people at the rural level will have benefit. Those are some key indicators that at the end of the 4 years of Okpebholo, people will want to see were there a difference, were there any impact on the people. So when we look at those key developments, but if you also look at key indicator for governance, I just pick judiciary, for instance. Our government want to strengthen judiciary. I'm happy that my friend, the Commissioner for Justice, have also spelled out some key elements for reform. As civil society, we want to see how those reforms will really start to move forward. How do you strengthen, for example, issue of access to information? People are misinformed when they are not properly informed, and that could be an obstacle to development. So the government, are they willing to put in place legislations that will help empower the people access to information? That could be a key element to assess the government in the next few years. And then you also go into the budget that I've mentioned earlier on in terms of transparency and accountability. How often the government disclose what they are doing and they carry people along? One area that has received a lot of attention in Edo State is the issue of revenue collection. Government try as much as possible to use both formal and informal way to collect revenue. And if government is very successful in revenue collection, it helps boost the income of the state, and then government is able to have resources to build infrastructure. But how government go about doing this, sends the right signal or the wrong signal? That's an area where the people would like to also judge how government is also improving on policy on revenue collection. And then another element of it all is security. If the people are not secure, you have seen, last time I was watching on the television when Senator Adam Oshomole was raising questions about the activity of the herdsmen across Edo State. That's a very serious issue. You and I know now that it's pretty difficult for our people, particularly in the rural area, to go to their farm without the fear of being kidnapped or being killed. And this is a very serious issue that I think Edo State government need to put attention to. And just recently we have seen what has happened in Uromi that has attracted nationwide condemnation. But also too, we have to also look what leads to this? What are the issues that lead to this? And how do we address this issue? Because you have to put that in context. Because if you don't do the right diagnosis, you will not be able to apply the right solution to problem. So, and I think the government need to put in place a local way of responding to this kind of conflicts. And one of those things that have been very successful in past regime is this local vigilante. And I think government need to invest in the local vigilante. A good way to ensure that there is security in the community, and they understand the local context, and they are able to complement the effort of the police to address this issue of security. And our government go about it is to remove politics from how they put in place the security apparatus. Because if the security architecture of a state is not properly designed and you politicize it, it won't be efficient. And once it's not efficient, there is a consequence. And that's exactly what we've been experiencing in Edo State. And it has a way of undermining peace. And without peace, you can't have development, because there's a correlation between peace and development. Particularly in communities where they can no longer go to farm as a result of the activity of the herdsmen, you will agree that it will have impact on the urban center. Because if the rural people don't go to farm, if there is no farming, particularly in this season, we are just entry, you will not have food. And then the price of food will increase. And that will lead to inflation. And once there is inflation, you can imagine the impact in terms of hunger, no access to food. And then you're pushing people to the extreme. And there will more armed robbery, car snatching. And this, again, undermines the credibility of the government. And that impacts negatively on the state of governance in the state.
All right, now you've perused through some various aspects of citizens asking for accountability. You talked about the court judgment about the Edo State government. You talked about security. You talked about information management. You talked about, the hinterlands we're going to farm agriculture. Now, if you take a look at Edo State, what do you think is really paramount to the citizens in terms of all these you've mentioned that the government should look into?
I think first the government need to create security. That's the paramount. You know, once government is able to create security, the people they're not bothered who govern them. They're not concerned who is the governor, who is a parliamentarian. The people just need an enabling environment so that they can go about carrying out their activity. That enabling environment is what is required. I recall those days as a young boy growing up in Igobazwa. Sorry, I have to make another connection with that. As a growing young boy in Igobazwa those days, going to the farm is unheard of. Just less than 13 or 12 years old, I used to go to farm myself. And this is about 4 miles away from the town. And I return back successfully. There's no fear that somebody is going to kidnap you. And then we used to see some people from the north who were used to come around to over assist in farming those days. But not this kind of situation where somebody go to the farm, the next thing you hear he has been kidnapped. And what the next step is people asking for ransom. This is unheard of in those days. And so what do you think is priority for the people of Igobazwa? Is to create sanity, security in going to Ubeka, going to the farm. That kind of security is what the people want. And then another thing, the infrastructure that people want to see is road infrastructure. Because once you put the road infrastructure in place, you just see that the place is developing on its own. And then government trying to create social protection. It's very important. Government must create an enabling environment where the very poor can access a kind of social protection. And then the health facility is very important. For example, if you visit the health center in Igobazwa today, I think it's one of the poorest in the whole entire local government in Edo State. And this is unacceptable. In this period, you can't believe it. And then another infrastructure that you can also remind yourself of is the Ministry of Agriculture. How have the government strengthened the Ministry of Agriculture to work with the local people to be able to embark on massive farming? Because once the people embark on massive farming, it will reduce the cost of food. Because if you take into consideration the rural-urban drift, and that has really make it impossible to have access to labor at the local level. And that's what these young men and women coming from the northern part of the country is feeding into. But that now has now led to crisis and making it impossible for people to go to the farm to do their daily activity. But how do you address those issues? Government need to put in place the right institutions to help the local farmers. Good seedlings, you know, even loans, to make loan available to the farmer. This is the best time government should be making loan available to the farmers so that they can use the credits to buy farm tools to be able to carry out farm. Okay. And once they carry out those farm, then you can be assured that we have enough food that can come to the urban center.
All right.
And that will reduce the potential for hunger.
Well, right now in Edo State, Reverend, it's like Edo State citizens, they're clamoring just for one thing: security. Because all you talked about, health, agriculture, infrastructure, jobs, you just name it, they're tied to one thing: security. Because if the state is not secured, you can tell that nothing will move forward. What do you think the government should do about this? And don't forget about the devastating incident that happened where up to 14 or 19 persons were, murdered because of this mistrust or distrust, so to speak, about security architecture and when they're really coming from or going to. What do you think Okpebholo should do about this?
You see, it's to end the culture of impunity. You know, when people commit crime and they are not addressed, they are not arrested, they are not persecuted, nothing happened, it breeds a culture of impunity. And people cannot be allowed to take laws into themselves. The implication is that innocent people could lose their life. And that's why we must allow the rule of law to prevail. And on the basis, a society you don't allow the rule of law to prevail, people will take laws into themselves. And particularly when people don't trust the security system. These are the kind of manifestation you see around. Because if people trust the security system, they report such incidents. For example, when a family member is kidnapped, you go to the police station, and you find out that the response of the police is that, oh, to your tent, to Israel. it makes people distrust the police. And then they lost their family member. And so there's a grievance. And people get angered because of that. And people feel very bad. And they take laws into their hand. So what government should do is to put a system in place, particularly in those rural areas where this incidence is prevalent, and ensure that when such incidents happen, the people can easily access such apparatus. And that's why I am encouraging Governor Okpebholo to take time to invest in the local vigilante. It's very important. You know, all governors have what they call the security vote.
Votes, yes.
You know, I will expect that every governor that gets security vote should invest some percentage of that resources in sustaining local initiative that can deal with the challenge of insecurity. Because I tell you, the killing of those people in Uromi just at the national level or at the local level, you probably will not see the implication to Edo State. But it's not good for investors. And for Edo State to develop and for quality of life to improve, you need investors. You need people to come with their resources, to come into Edo State to invest. But when an investor picks up a newspaper and says 14 people were murdered in Uromi, no serious investor will want to come and invest in such an environment. Because it shows that law and order has broken down. And when law and order is broken down, it's difficult for any serious-minded investor to carry his resources and say, I want to go and invest in such an environment. And in that sense, it affects the government. And government alone cannot bring development. We need partnership with private sector. We need partnership with civil society. It is only when we have a multi-stakeholder engagement that you can ensure that there is development. And so government must find time to invest in keeping the environment in a peaceful way so that investors, the first thing investors look at is to look at the risk element of going into an environment. Yeah. So if the market is very risky, no serious-minded investor will go to such market. And so each time there is armed robbery, there is kidnapping, there is killing, it puts Edo State in a bad light. And that's what exactly I think Okpebholo should take very seriously.
Now, you talked about investing in our local vigilante.
Yes.
How do you think this should be done by the governor?
Is to depoliticize it. You know, the problem that I think Okpebholo government is facing at this point in time, and I'm happy that at least the court judgment has come now, it can now focus on governance. You know, governance is quite different from when you are contesting an election. I've said this oftentimes, and I've put up an open letter to address this issue. The people that help you to win elections are not necessarily the people that will help you to deliver on governance. Because governance is a serious business. You know, to win an election is a different thing entirely. But to deliver governance, you need quality people. You need people who have what it takes to deliver. But it doesn't take away the fact that you will not compensate those who help you win the election. But you need a serious intellectual people who has capacity to deliver on governance. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what will Okpebholo be remembered for after 4 years?
Good question.
What will he be remembered for? Is it that the killing of the 14 people in Uromi, or I don't know the number yet? Is it the kidnapping of people across the local government? So for him to avoid that kind of labeling is to put in place the right people to handle right issues. And so for the issue of security, we have seen that in the past government, there are things that were done properly. The government must take note of them.
So it's a build on administration.
You don't need to politicize those issues. If the past government delivered on security, things like this didn't happen, you have to reflect what
What did they
Obaseki
do?
did well, that made it possible for Obaseki to ensure that there wasn't things like this. You have to improve on it and get the right people. That's why in a good governance climate, in an advanced democracy, irrespective of the political party you are affiliated with, whoever that has finally won election or win the election, he picks people who will be able to help him or her to deliver on what he promised the people. And so, for the issue of governance, to be able to be effective, to have impact on the quality of life of people, security must be taken into consideration to make sure that the herdsmen don't create problem. Then the issue of agriculture, the Ministry of Agriculture need to be strengthened. And then the issue of health sector, you need to make sure that all the health facility at the local government level need to improve, because that is what will make the people to decide in 4 years' time, do we still consider to vote for this man again? Because it's the amount of investment that the government put in place that improve the quality of life of the people that will inform the decision. Because the idea to think that I can always win election without necessarily even getting the people involved will be coming to an end. Because the people, there is consciousness that it's time to reclaim our voice.
All right. Thank you so much. We're David Ogoloke. Our time is up. You know, time just keeps flying away, keep speaking truth to power in the most subtle way. This platform is a watchdog to the government of the day. Watch this program, listen to it. You may pick 1 or 2 ideas that's going to make governance easy for you, even as a governor of the state. You've heard Reverend David Ogolo pointing out some key factors, some key elements the government led by Senator Mondo Polo should look into vis-a-vis security, agriculture, health, but they are all tied to one thing: security. He said revamping the local vigilante. That if we can take it on for today and work on it, Edo State will be safer, will be better. Once more, Reverend, appreciate
Thank you very much.
All right. We'll do it again next week, Monday, God willing. Bye for now.